Hey, welcome to the show, everybody. This is the Leadership Toolkit. My name is Mike. I'm going to be your host. As you know, this is the definitive leadership podcast for you to tune in, gain some knowledge through people's successes. Sometimes we talk about what their failures have been because one way you fail forward, right? You fumble forward. We do that. And we spend the time so that you can grow yourself, and then certainly you can grow your team, you can grow your people, you can grow your business. And so that's our opportunity here every week on the Leadership Toolkit. Thank you for coming in and joining us today. I've got an amazing guest. As you know, each week we interview people from different verticals of business. It's not always the same perspective, it's not always the same background. In fact, it never is. So today is no different. I have a very amazing guest, Jason Yarusi, who is a keynote speaker. He's a multifamily investor. He's an entrepreneur. He's a business coach. He is a leadership coach. He's a charismatic communicator on every stage that he graces, and he's going to be with us today on screen. Welcome, Mr. Jason Yarusi. Thank you for taking the time to join me on the Leadership Toolkit today, man.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. It's good to be here.
Absolutely. Well, if you would do me a favor and spend just a couple of minutes, give us the elevator pitch. Share what's your background in business, what's your background in leadership, so that the audience can get to know you a little bit, and then let's get into having an awesome conversation, man.
Yeah, so you did a great job telling today, right? And many times we see it today, but we forget about all the steps, right? The steps, the missteps that it's taken to get here. So,
Absolutely.
going back, I'll take you back, right? So high school years, had some losses, right? So in my formative years, just faced some losses, some friends, and it really set the track for me. I was a shy kid, right? I always was shy, and I had my best friend and my girlfriend randomly at just random times throughout high school were killed in just tragic events. Car accident, a boating accident, and just had another friend commit suicide. And I just felt really lost for a number of years. And I went to college, again, just did not feel like I was like in my body, if that makes sense, right? And I just didn't feel like I had the confidence. It felt like a lot of things were outside of my control, which is the world, right? But many times, you can choose to just say, well, I can't control it, so I just give up, right? And I was at that moment of just self-doubt for many years. So I got a business degree, specialized in finance in college, and had no motivation to do that. Left college with a lack of just direction, and moved into New York City, just in the world of the unknown, right? And just started doing odd jobs, right? I was working in bars, working in restaurants, and I just had all this pent up just anger, frustration about just in my life, my settings, right? Just blaming everything I could get my finger in front of, right? That was that fault, but nothing was my fault. It was everything else's fault of why I was here and not having potentially the success that mentally I thought I should have, but I wasn't taking the steps to actually have success, right? Well, lo and behold, one night I'm leaving, working at a bar. It's like 2, 3 in the morning, get on my bike, just mad at the universe, riding across Manhattan, heading down to my apartment. And out of nowhere, I get hit by a car. And I'm taken to the hospital and, banged up, got some stitches, got a pin in my wrist, broken bone in my shoulder, and, the whole thing. Right. Well, I get out of the hospital, and here I am going back to my apartment just now, less than 18 hours ago, I'm hit by a car. Right. And all I can think about is like, oh, I got to get back to this job because I need to make money so I can, make rent. Right. And I had this like crazy thought of like, okay, hold on. All I'm doing is complaining about where I am, complaining about my circumstance, complaining about my settings, right? I just, and here I am, I have this thing happen, right? Well, luckily I'm heading home at this time and not into the grave, right? And lo and behold, all I can think about is getting back to the place I don't want to be. And I'm sure people can think about that, right? Like many times in your life, like we're stuck in this pattern that's comfortable, and we know it's not the best place, but it's rather to be uncomfortable in something we know than uncomfortable in something that it could be fearful, right? Or could create fear in our life. Well, I made a pact myself, like, okay, if I'm going to do this and just stay where I am, then I have to stop complaining and just be okay and just be like, all right, if I'm going to do chaotic things, I have to just continue to accept what's happening in my life, or I could just try something different. But the key is where most get stuck is that you just don't know what to try, right? You're like, I don't know how to change what I'm doing. So I just started to do things that just made sense to me, like stop staying up late, stop, drinking at the end of the night, get up at a certain time, go and start reading books again, right? Go start to work out more, just start doing things that would create more positive action than negative. And it wasn't like overnight, but lo and behold, little by little, change after change, things started to grow, right? You started to get that snowball effect where I just started to have some momentum behind me, right? Because instead of pointing outwards, I was pointing at myself and saying like, it's me, right? I'm the main thing of everything that's happening is me. It's nothing else. And I went from working behind the bar. I opened a bar at one point, opened a restaurant, and I opened and sold a brewery before moving to New Jersey after Hurricane Sandy happened to help my dad with his small construction business that was dedicated for a lot of work that was really themed around houses that face some tragic event like a storm, right? So
Mm-hmm.
my brother moved out with me, my girlfriend and now my wife at the same time moved with me, and we really ramped that business up. We had about 25 times the revenue on that business, just grew it tremendously. So it was a really good learning experience there. Helped dad get out of that business that had been tough on him for many years to retirement, and we started to move into the next phase of our life, and that was real estate. Because at the time, everything, I was taking notes mentally that everything I was doing was transactional, right? I had to do something to get something, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if I ever wanted time back, at the time, Peely, my wife, was pregnant with our first child, and I
Mm-hmm.
like if there was 25 hours in the day, I would have used them, right? Just doing something, because we were
Right.
so busy with every aspect of construction, or all these things had to involve me, or there was no revenue, and I hadn't learned how to separate the two. So if I wasn't doing, there was nothing, right? So you take time off and it's a detriment to the business. Well, we kept asking the question in the real estate business, how can we find a way to just control the day and not feel out of control at all levels? Like I now it wasn't personal anymore, it was business, right? Before I was out of control on the personal level, and now out of control on the business. And I came upon someone who was buying apartment communities, and I was like, that just stuck to me because I understood how you could use a larger asset, right? Like I understood the difference in small restaurants and big restaurants, small bar,
Mm-hmm.
big bar, like it's the same processes, right? But you get more leverage the bigger you go, even though it seems more scary. Well, the model made sense for me. So I doubled down, learned everything I could, put the blinders on all forms of real estate, and dove in to just educate myself, excuse me, on the business of acquiring an apartment community. And we ended up putting that to work and brought a community in 2017. It was 94 units in Louisville, Kentucky, while living in New Jersey. And
Mm-hmm.
we started to really ramp that business up with all the lessons we learned from all the other businesses to grow that into a big business today, where we've brought about 3,500 units across 7 states down here in the Southeast.
Dude, what a crazy background. What a crazy ride. And it's, I mean, I'm sitting here thinking, how quickly does all this happen? Because you're saying, okay, a minute ago we're at high school, and here's one of the faux pas we fall into on the
Yep.
internet, right? People can be looking at Jason right now and they go, oh man, that dude, he's got apartment buildings and he's successful and he's doing all this stuff. Well, a minute ago you're talking about, hey, here's how my high school went, and there were some tragedies, and then I made it through college. I'm just curious too. I wrote down a bunch of questions because I never know what direction I'm going to go. What did you go to college for? What was like your major, or what were you attending for?
you know, I did get a business degree. I get with a finance specialty, right? And so I got
Okay.
and when I went to college, I mean, like randomly, like I did well in sports, so I got recruited to go play football. I didn't even know. I was like, somebody came to recruit me, and I was so lost. I just like, well, yeah, I'll go to that school. I didn't even know what state it was in. It was in Pennsylvania, and I was in New Jersey. I
Sure.
was like, yeah, whatever, I'll go there,
Pick
right? So
it.
I got there, and I picked my major on a point where it was like coming up at the end of sophomore year. Like, you got to pick a major. And I had a girlfriend at the time, and her mom's like, you're good with numbers. Why don't you do business? Like, I think just trying to like get me to proactively
Just
do
throws it
something.
out there, right?
Yeah, I was like, okay, that's what it is, right? So you could see I was really making these dialed in, dedicated decisions, right? And so
Sure.
that was the level of rationale I was using at the time.
So here's what I was going to say. The faux pas of the internet is like moments ago, and if someone tunes into you now, or they tune into your, it's that Live 100 podcast, right? And so they
Yeah.
tune in to Jason and they go, holy cow, this guy, because we all see that success on the outside, and most people that are in your position, or my position, people that are in leadership roles, like, we're not afraid to discuss, like, hey, here's this real struggle that I had to overcome and so forth. But somebody can tune in and they hear that story from high school or college, and literally 2 minutes later they're looking at, oh man, here's this awesome speaker and leadership coach, and you've got all this stuff. And so there's so many steps in between, and as you're telling this, I'm thinking to myself, like, well, what's the time frame? Because you look very young, but the amount of time that goes through
Yeah.
this is wild. So when did you go, whoops, I dropped this out of my ear. What is the time frame from you? And then it's, what's crazy is Was that the sole catalyst to get you to move? Was you got hit on the way home and you said like that's the time you can pinpoint that, or was there somebody else that was speaking into you at that time?
No, no one's speaking into me, right? I again, like I've carried that, like I'll go out and I'll speak a lot, but my preference is to like there's introvert and extrovert. Like I can act as an
Sure.
introvert being an introvert, right? Action extrovert being an introvert. Where my wife is exactly opposite, right? She's got a family, the Hawaiian family that's massive, right? She's got more aunts and uncles than you could probably half the island is her family, right? So
Sure.
she gets her energy from that. Where me, I'm the opposite side. So to double down, it made it even harder for me to communicate when I was just angry at the world and feeling like I wasn't adding up, right? And many times when you're doing that, you close off, right? You close off, and it can be helpful because if you're in the right mind, it can be helpful because you can close off and do work on yourself, right? And not be
Hmm.
so set up looking at everybody else's successes or wherever there are. But there's a certain limitation to that because you come on a podcast like this, you listen to a podcast like this, you're learning how to jump forward
Hmm.
across the steps of the trials and tribulations that others have faced without having to face them. And if
Sure.
I'm just closed off to the setting, I'm just going through the same difficulties as someone else is facing, right? And so when you look at, businesses, the more I started to open up and ask questions, right? Many times we don't want to ask the question for fear of looking silly, right, or looking
Sure.
dumb. And so, but as soon as you get out of the way and just understand that these other people are here. They're already one step ahead of me or five steps ahead of me. Why don't I just ask the question, right? And that's been the shortcut, for going the apartment community business, right, and the acquisition business, and really at a tremendous level is because I put people around me that were doing it
Hmm.
successfully. I said, "How did you do that?" And it's usually those small little steps that give you the confidence because we want to have the $1 million or run the marathon without actually doing the steps throughout, right? And so when you look at it and say, that is scary. I don't know how I'll ever do it. You don't start. But when you actually look at it and say the first step is where all of the information comes from, right? Because you'll either get it that I take a step and it was absolutely the wrong way. Okay, I've
Hmm.
learned a lesson. Don't do that again. Or I take a step and it's like it kind of feels okay, but it's not great. Well, what can I learn from that? Who can help me get feedback to get online? Or you take a step and it's the right way. Now you have the confidence to take another step. But all of those are learning lessons that you can use to your advantage to start gaining traction in your life.
So that's really, really powerful. And I want to expand on that because there's a few things um, that I keyed in on. And I think it's important, especially if people are listening to the show, if you're listening on, Spotify later or whether you're watching, I would write that question down and I put it in the comments as well. How did you do that? I think that so often people, as we move through business, we move through being an
Yeah.
entrepreneur, we get, you get good at something. It could be good at, you were, working in bars, you could get good at
Mhm.
being a bartender, and then you get promoted on and so forth. Or you get good, like my background is sales, you get good as sales, and then what they do is they promote you to a sales manager, right? They go, oh
Yep.
well, you must do that, so here we're going to do this. And because then at that point we're sort of quote unquote expected to have it all figured out,
Mm.
we put on this shield, we put on this facade a little bit, that it's like, well, I already have to have this figured out. And that's such a powerful question that you shared, and it's so simple, is you just have to look at the people that came before you and say, hey, how did you do that?
Yeah.
And then you really be prepared to listen, right? Like take notes and write that stuff down. Because one of the other things that I heard you say when you were like, hey, I left the bar business, or the bar scene, restaurant scene, sort of, to open your own restaurant.
Mhm.
So, and again, you can say that swiftly in one breath right now, right? Oh, hey, I left this and I went and opened a restaurant. It's like, yeah, piece of cake, as we're sitting watching. But what was the time frame, let me ask you, between working for someone and then going to start that restaurant, and then later selling the restaurant? What was
Yeah.
the time frame in there, and sort of what
So
was the first step, the catalyst to say, hey, I'm going to go open this and do my own thing?
yeah, so it was between 2007 and 2009. We were doing that
Okay.
transition between the restaurants and the brewery, right? And so we were doing a
Okay.
lot of things that proactively I didn't know was readying me for that, right? So I was running a very successful outdoor bar in New York City. Started the brewery. It took us almost 2 years to get approved because breweries were just on the uprise and approvals. I
Sure.
don't think they had approved a New York City brewery since like Prohibition. So they were like, we don't know how to do this. So it would take forever, right? So we had an ABC lawyer that helped us to get across the finish line in that. But when we got out of the gate, we were able to utilize the bar that was very big to honestly put our beer up. And it was like free marketing, right? So it was free research and free marketing to see what was working, what was selling, right? And how it could adapt to the city. So that helped us on that front. And then the restaurant had, my partner was working at a really, so there's St. Mark's. It was a really popular sushi restaurant on that street. And so those owners had that, and they had another one. And so we just leveraged what they were doing in that concept to open up our same, not the same business, but a like kind concept in another neighborhood, right? To use that model, right? So we were many times like, we're like, man, I just got to figure it all out and like come up with this great idea. And you see all these things and like, sure, you can do that. Like you can, create the next, Uber, right? Sure, you can do that. You can figure out that model, but you can also literally just say, well, someone created that business. So why can't I create that same business model here in my city or in this part and just replicate the model by using the practices, right? Like even in like with a business I do, I didn't recreate the wheel. I literally said, like, what were they doing? What were they doing successfully? Like, let's use those components to understand how to identify a market to invest in, understand how to underwrite a business, a building, right? How to team and put together the team for the building, how to do the closing process, how to manage the building, right? These were not new concepts, right? I look to take the existing concept and build to it, add levels that will optimize it, but I'm not recreating the model. And many times we get stuck because we think we have to come up with this new brass idea of just something that's completely foreign to anything that's been successful. But you can win in 10 different ways. And why not make the easy shortcut of just saying, oh, this other person's doing it. I can do that business because it leverages some of my strengths. And then that gets back to really looking at yourself and being honest with yourself. What are my strengths, right? Am I good at talking to people? Am I good at sales, right? Am I good with numbers, right? Am I good at marketing? Like where can I be a benefit to this business? And then that showcases, what are you missing, right? If you're great at the back end, great at the numbers, great at all the other parts, but you're not good at talking to people and you really don't like that, sometimes we'll push ourselves to have to do that, where you could literally find someone who is just great. Like they'll talk all day and they'll help sell the business, but then you will do the other side that will be the analysis side while they do the front side of the face side, right?
So yeah, no, I think it's perfect. I love the fact that you're saying you can win 10 different ways. I think it's easy to fall into the trap so often where people say, well, this is my goal, that's my end game, so this is where I'm headed, and so we're headed in this straight line, or we think, right? You've seen those memes where it says what people think success looks like is this way and what it actually looks like is all over
100%.
the place. So when you're going after something like that and you say, okay, well, I can win in 10 different ways, I want you to think back for a second, because I'm curious. Moving, from the restaurant, you said then you helped your dad with the construction business, 25x'd it and so forth. You've moved into, keynote speaking and running a podcast and doing these things. When you're starting something new as an entrepreneur, automatically you're the leader of that thing that you're doing. And I'm curious, because you're saying, hey, I'm okay asking the question, like, how did you do that? And I followed the people. Can you think about what are the steps? What are 2 or 3 either people specifically that hey, I went to this person, or what are 2 or 3 methods like books or internet or YouTube, or what, when you get that itch, because you sound a little bit like a serial entrepreneur to me, when you get that itch and you go, hey, we're going to go, what are the first phases that you research to learn that to help move yourself forward?
So on a personal level, the thing to do is it's put on the blinders. And that's the hardest thing to do, because, before, you get back in the 90s and where you just didn't have this access to information. You have an idea and you don't have all these other ideas coming at you left, right, forwards, backwards. Today, you have an idea, and by the time you think through the idea, you've been hit with 56 alerts of just all the next great idea of what you should do and what everybody else is doing in this world. And your mind goes on a crazy mode of just exploring all these different ideas, right? But you can't get anywhere doing all of these ideas. So if you have an idea in mind, right? So for me, when we were doing various forms of real estate and when we came upon the apartment syndication model, I literally put blinders on. I wouldn't look at anything else. I started to listen to podcasts that were strictly dedicated to the model that I was looking to replicate, to the business that I was looking to do. I started to go and meet people, right? Look for people in my area. I was in New Jersey at the time. I started to research people. I was finding people that were a mile away from me that had owned thousands of units, across the country. And I would just say, hey, listen, this is what I'm trying to do. Can I just come talk to you, right? So I just started to really put the blinders on to make sure that everything I was focused on was this, because it fast tracks two things. Either fast tracks something that gives you energy and pushes you forward, or you find out very quickly it's not for you. Because where we do is we usually tread water for many years, saying, I think this is kind of a good idea, but you have no research and no backing to actually say, okay, it is or it isn't, because you don't commit to anything. But if you put it on and commit to it, right, you'll find out very quickly if it feels right, if you think it has viability, right? And then within that, you want to make sure there's a market for it, right? So, very simply, real estate, right? People are always going to need a place to live. We have it. We this decade, we need 16.5 million units built. We're on pace to do 11 million. So that serves that we're not going to meet the need for housing, right? No surprise. It's very costly to build, supply chain, labor, all these things shortcutting us, right? Okay, so that's another reason why buying an existing building would make sense. And could I build one? Sure, but it's more risky and it's longer to get there. But if I can buy a building, well, that building that I focus on is for workforce housing, right? So a building it's built for the everyday man, right? The everyday person. And that's the biggest thing in need, because when they're building something, they're building new. Okay, so there's a market there. Well, now I can look at my city, right? Is my city flourishing? And is there a lot of jobs coming here? Is there path to progress, right? Are there people moving here every day? Or is it the onset? There's one employer, right? It's not really much happening right here. It looks, well, then that might not be the city, right? And so you can start going down these ways to just identify the path, learning about the path, and then back in, make sure there's a customer base, right? In my faction, like a tenant base, right? But in anything, like a customer base that can serve my product, and I can serve the customer base because there's enough people there to really suit what I'm trying to do.
Sorry, I got to pull me back on screen. I was taking notes again.
You're great.
No, I love it, man. So the first couple things that I heard you say, and this is some of the stuff that I wrote down, I think it's really valuable. And for folks listening to the podcast, write this down, put on the blinders. We get so many distractions. And it's interesting that you said that, because you said, hey, once I've got this idea, heaven forbid you search for one item on the internet, because you said you get 54 different notifications, right? You're getting marketed to, you're getting remarketed to. I mean, also that's my background. So it's, I don't hate that.
It, right? Yep.
I don't hate that.
Yeah.
At the same time, I think there's so much value, because like you're saying, like, hey, when we're, coming up, when I was coming up in business, 80s, 90s, you got an idea and you had to be so deliberate and focused on what is that idea. Okay, maybe I got to go to the library or look it up you might appreciate this, in my Encyclopedia Britannica, so that I could research it some more, right? And then Google was just coming online, where in the early 2000s, so you could start to move and do some of these things more efficiently. Well, now there's all of this, we'll call it information bloat, right? You say, hey, I've got this idea, and then there's 50 ways to accomplish that idea. So I think that number one, where you said put on the blinders, is really, really valuable. I have a good friend of mine, his name's James Ziegler, and Jim Ziegler, and he says, beware of distractions disguised as opportunities.
I like it.
And I think it's a really powerful statement. That's what came to mind when you were talking about that. Is it's like, gosh, that's so true right now, because it's so easy to be like, oh yeah, that's a good idea, and that's a good idea, and that's a good idea, but what's the original thing? And do those complement that? And then secondly, I think it's really powerful, and people need to look at this, is like, what's the market? What is the actual market like? What are the market conditions where you want to set that up, and so forth? So I think that's really powerful for you to bring that up. One thing I've heard you say, or I've taken sort of in between you speaking, is a lot of these times that you're making changes, both personally or professionally, you're the one that's the catalyst. And something I didn't say at the beginning, and you haven't brought up, you're an ultra runner as well. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. I haven't run any this year, but each year since 2018, I've run various marathons, ultra marathons. So
what does that entail? Can you, I know we're just, and listen, just roll with me. This is how my brain works. I'm like, oh, hey, by the way, this came up, let's go over here. So can you expand on that for some people that may not be familiar with ultra running? And they may be, but what does that look like for you?
So a marathon is 26.2 miles, and anything longer than marathon distance would be considered an ultra marathon, right? So you might get into something of a 30 mile or a 50 mile. I've run 100-mile races, right? And those are long distance races that are themed ultra marathons, right? And so for me, running gave me a different perspective, because it's a good time to think, because if you break up and you take an hour, right, with various businesses, you just have all kinds of emails, all kinds of things. And you're just in that pace all the time, where you're just like constantly like on alert. it's hard for you to have your own clear mind to get the best thoughts in, right? And so
Sure.
I find that very little, right? I was talking with the team the other day. Like we have managers in many states that will manage properties. Or out of my office, we manage maybe 600 units, right? And they're reacting very quickly, which is fantastic. But they're treating everything as if it's an emergency, and that sometimes sets you up for failure because you're setting everything up as if it's level 10, right? It's code red, when in fact 99% of everything happening is not an emergency, right? And so you have to put it through the right process to allow it to go through the channels so you don't break the channels. Because as you grow, if you have a broken system, as you grow, right? Well, the system does not get better. You don't fix it when you get to a new level, right? It just magnifies how broken the system is. And the same thing goes with running, right? If I'm going to do a long distance race, 100-mile, and I go out of the gate and I'm running, trying to run a 5-minute mile, right? Well, that 100 miles can be hard to get to, right? Because now I've just beat myself up. I get there, right? So they say the first 50 miles is your legs, the last 50 miles is your mind, right? And so you have to look at it of finding a pace, but then just like a goal, right? If I was to look at 100 miles and that's my goal, my mind would be like, oh, there's no way you're going to be able to do that, right? And that's like usually with people's goals, they haven't done something. So their mind is the first thing that shuts them off. It says, no way, can't do it. So I might as well give up now, right? But if you say, okay, I started to treat my first 100-mile race of just doing it in a series of tasks that I could complete. Because I was like, I have no idea how to train for this race, right? I don't know. I didn't, I was too brazen to look. I don't look up at like the course online. So I just said, okay, I don't know how to train for this. So I'm just going to run 6 miles every day, cold, 100 degrees, my ear hurts, my knee sore, doesn't matter. I'm just going to do it every morning, no matter what, in the dark. And I did that. So when I came out to the race, I didn't know how to run 100 miles. Like some days I would run longer races and longer runs, but typically I got to the race. I was like, okay, let's just run 6 miles to the first aid station and we'll just see what happens. Right. So I did that. Let me just run another 6 miles to the next, drink station. Okay. Let me run another 5 miles to the next one, and I'll do that. Okay. Now it might be, let me run 1,000 feet, or let me just run to that bridge, or let me just run through that tunnel. Because what I found is that your mind's always going to tell you to stop when something gets hard. It's your first reaction. It's basically trying to keep you safe, right? And what I find is that if you could just do one more step and just say, okay, I understand that that's trying to tell me to do this, but let me just run to this next point. Let me just run to the bridge. And if my mind's still telling me to do that, maybe I can think it through then and choose if I want to quit. Or let me just get there and now we do the next one and then the next one and then run another 100 feet. Or let me just run up the hill and let me just run down to the bridge and let me just run to that next drink station. And lo and behold, I just did 100 miles in the form of 6-mile races. Because I learned in my mind to accomplish that in 6-mile races. So I got to the end of 100 miles after a series of completing actions that I could control. And when you look at your goals like that, right? Because right now, if you have a goal and you haven't done something, it's because the goal is too scary for you. But if you break that down into the first step, you can simply take the first step, because we treat the first step as if, okay, well, all I got to do to get going is step out of this 10-story building and just hope for a parachute, right? Or you can just say, all I'm doing is stepping off the curb. I'm just taking one step. I'm not jumping into this whole new business thing, right? I'm just taking that first step. And when you do, you take that first step, you learn the next step, right? You learn the next step, whether it's forward, backward, left, right, up, down, but you learn something, right? And then what you do with that is you get more confidence and you start to build the momentum, right? These small things start to create this ripple effect, because by the time you get to the goal, like you said, we treat these goals, we have to have it all figured out. Well, the goal is not the stopping point. We get so stuck in our mind that, like, honestly, like if, when I lose 30 pounds, then life's going to be perfect, right? Or I make $1 million, then life's going to be perfect. What you forget is then there's the day after that. And now how you have to live as that person, right? You got to be that person now going forward. Like, who are you as that person who's lost that weight or has gotten into shape or has made $1 million or starting a business? Like, who are you at that point? And that's the true definition of you discovering yourself. But how you find that is that you start taking these steps to build yourself into the goal, because by the time you get to the goal, you're already grown past the goal. And then the goal doesn't become this magical moment that you think is going to solve everything.
I don't even know how to respond to all that. I love that. I love the whole, just your whole candor, the whole presentation, and everything you're talking about there. And as I'm thinking about it, I did write down a couple questions which I want to get to in a minute, but I want to focus on the ultra marathons and the race portion for a second. So do you run them differently now than when you started? What did you learn that you said, hey, I'm going to change this?
So I'll tell you, the first one I did was a 50-mile up in Ithaca, New York, which is a ton of mountains. And again, like, we go to the part of not looking at the races, right? I was like, okay, 2 things I'm going to do is I'm really strong on the uphill, and I just have to keep my feet dry. And if I do that, I think I'll have a great race. Well, third mile in, it's the Ithaca Mountains. It was too steep to run up the uphills. I'm like, okay, well, I guess got to change on that one. And then the fourth mile in, they discovered that you cross this river 4 times. And I was like, okay,
Oh,
well,
wow.
new rules, no rules, right? And so many times in life, we want to have everything perfect with the laid down step, with almost like you ever bowl and you have the bumpers on. You're like, okay, I just want to bowl and have the bumpers on, right, in my life. But that's not how life is, right? Life has a series of things that are going to come out of nowhere, and it's your ability to control your reaction to them that sets the stage for you to be able to continue to break through. Because when you look at that, you say, oh, problem, or you say, oh, okay, I want to be successful in business. Well, that's the key, right? All these people doing great things, they've provided a solution to something that provided angst or a problem to somebody else. And when you can look at every problem differently and you start saying, well, the problem is providing me with a new solution. So I've learned many times in running. I'm like, okay, well, I'm running and all of a sudden, like, my hip's hurting. Okay, well, man, what did I do to my hips hurting? And when I'm looking at it, it must be just me, like it must my hip hurting. But then I start looking at it, I'm like, well, I've been running on the road crowns, right? I've been running on the right side where I've been running on this pitch the whole time, where I'm pitching where my left leg is higher than my right leg, and so it's making my hip hurt. So when you stop getting away and just looking dedicated, like, I gotta get my hip hurting. Well, what's the solution to my problem? Okay, I got to switch sides and start running on the other side of the road, right? And you could treat that like anything. Like, you have to adapt to the circumstances that come up instead of just staying in front of it and just saying, well, I guess it's just the problem. I guess I just have to deal with it, right? Because our key to being an entrepreneur, someone that provides value, is that you see a problem, and if you sit with it long enough, there's a way to go through it or around it, right? Or you can just say, well, I guess it's what it is, right? And when you do that, well, then someone else is going to solve it. But if you want to have value, right, and you look at these races, no matter how much you train for a race, like it always changes. Like I had one where I ran 75 miles. It was perfect, right? All great,
Mhm.
all time. And then I had there was like a mile at the 75 where I stopped. I saw my wife and she's like, hey, do you want to like change your clothes? I'm like, no, I'm good. I just got this last part. Well, at that point, the sun had just gone down. I wasn't paying attention to it. And I'd been insulated by all these trees, right? And so all of a sudden now I'm into this wide open space where it's now the sun's gone down, wide open space, the wind's whipping through me. And, I probably had burned like 16,000 calories by that time. And my body had just frozen. And I was like, okay, well, what's my solution here? And my solution was I could stop, or I could just look at the points and just trying to adapt. So I changed my code up and just keep going to that next aid station, right? So you start
Sure.
focusing on the next point. And those are things you're going to face, right? You might think that everything's perfect. And that's why like ultra marathon's fun, is like you're in this whole range of emotions. Like one moment you're absolutely fine. The next moment, like you feel like the world's going to fall down on you. And then all of a sudden you're fine again, right? Because you just find a way to break through it. And if you can do that in your life, understanding that, I like to treat problems as we'll call them 5-year problems, right? If something I'm dealing with right now, I'm not going to remember in 5 years, then why am I
Mhm.
giving it so much energy to solve and move on? Right. If it's something that's going to be, oh man, like I might really think about this in 5 years, well, then I better put my full attention into it right now, because we
Sure.
treat like everything, like I was talking with my team earlier, as a level 10 problem, when in fact they're not. Most things in the world are just part of the day.
No, I love that, and I've heard something similar. They said, look, if it's not going to affect you in 5 years, don't pay it 5 minutes now.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah,
That's
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 great.
the sort of thought. So here's a couple things, and I know I always get so deep into the show. I'm just sitting here listening, and one of the things I realized, I have shared Jason's contact information several times on the screen. But for those of you that may be listening on the audio podcast, and then I got a couple things I want to bring back to you, Jason. But for those of you that may be listening on the audio podcast, do make sure and check out Jason's website, jasonyarusi.com. That's JASONYARUSI.com. You can also connect with him through email. You can go to jason@live100.com, which is live-100.com. And I think that forwards to your website, right?
It does. Yeah, that will forward there. Yeah.
And then, certainly, yeah, check out Jason's Live 100 podcast. I watched a little bit of a couple of them, and man, you're talking about, hey, growing people, living 100, being motivational and so forth, and I love it. So
Thank you.
definitely people should tune in and check out your show. I think it's just about everywhere. I tuned in because my background is YouTube, but you're on Spotify and
Yeah,
iTunes and everywhere else. Yeah.
absolutely. Yes.
Great. So a couple things that I picked out of that, as Jason's talking, he's talking about these, because I think there's so much that parallels sports and athletics to business. There's a lot that parallels, and a few things that I picked out. and you were talking about, and I don't remember if it was the 75-mile race, but one of the races you said, I think in New York, there's all these mountains. As entrepreneurs, as business people, as leaders, we get this plan and we get it all laid out, just like you would for those ultra marathons. You get the plan and you say, well, here's going to be the approach, and this is what I'm going afterwards. One of the key things that you brought up there is you have to adapt. You have to love the solution more than you love the plan. You have to love the goal more than you love the tactics getting ready for it. And I think that's such a powerful statement that you can pull out of that, because it does. And you expanded on this. Like, that applies to everything. It applies to business. It applies to leadership. It applies to life, parenting, right?
Mhm.
If you think there's a plan for parenting, just get out of your head right now, because there's not. Both of us, we were talking before the show, both of us have 3 kids. I'm a few years out in front, and I can tell you that it'll work out. When there's parents like us, it'll all work out. Whatever, and for anybody listening, whatever you're going through with your kids right now, just stay right there with them. What they need, they need a parent. They need their parent involved. They need your attentiveness, and you're further ahead of your path, the path than your kids are. So stay in there. So, total side note. I told you we go down these paths. You had commented you've met with your team and your managers and your leaders in your organization. You have people all over the place. How do you, or what do you do when you're bringing people into your organization to train them for those leadership and management roles? Do you have a training module and set up yourself? Do you have them attend, specific classes, or what's your approach there to get them equipped?
Yeah, so within the business, we have trainers, right, that will put them through. And what I found is 2 parts. Is that I'm bringing you on to do a great job, right? And I'm bringing you on because of your skill set and because of just the great person you are, right? So what I used to do is I used to task you to death, right? And then what I found is that only creates someone who just needs the next task from me. And I limit your ability to go out there and perform, because you constantly have to question the next thought to make sure that fits in line with my task. And you might not even understand the goal, so you're less committed to that. And so now I've empowered people to say, okay, here's the vision, here's the goal, here's the framework we've used before, but I welcome all information and thought and practices for this position to be improved, right? And to take the goal. And here's where we're going, and here's why we want to go here. And what I found is that giving people that, it puts them in a position that they can take ownership, right? Instead of just saying, oh, well, I guess I have to do task 1. I don't know, I don't even know what, task 1 is, just go dig this hole, right? I don't know why I'm digging a hole, right? Then on that fact, like, okay, I don't know if the hole's deep enough. Let me go ask. Well, no, you have to go, keep digging, right? And if I don't know what I'm digging for, then ultimately I'm not committed to it, because I don't really have a code, but I could find a bigger way. Well, there's a machine right there. Why don't I just use the machine? Oh, we could use the machine, but no one ever asked me about that, right? So when you do that in life or any part, right? If you do that in terms of saying, like, the marketing strategies that we have to find tenants, or the way that we go, source customers for our HVAC business. If I look at that and I say, well, just do it this way because this is what we've always done, well, I'm not going to see my results change. I'm not going to get feedback on what's working and what's not working. But when I put great people that I'm bringing onto my team in a great role, and I say, here's where we're trying to go, and here's why we're trying to get it, I find that I get the performance level that I always was looking for before, because I'm not stopping them, right? Where I used to be the bottleneck, and now there is no bottleneck, because they have the ability to go out there and push forward with free reins, with the point of having checkpoints of where they need to be.
And I think oftentimes leaders, especially entrepreneurs, right? Those type A personalities, entrepreneurs, leaders, it is easy to fall into be like, well, I got to be the checkpoint.
Yeah.
And I think it's valuable to say, don't be the checkpoint. Let your people do this. One of the things you've brought up several times is, hey, we have good trainers, we have good people. When you're bringing somebody on from a leadership standpoint, because I'd like for other people to know and understand this. I think so often we hear people in business say that, well, I've got really good people, or I've got, managed to groom really good people in the business. And if somebody's tuned into the show and they're a leader or a manager and they're saying, okay, well, that's all well and good, but how do I find good people?
Yeah.
Can you give me like 4 or 5 traits that are specific that, hey, if I'm talking to somebody or I'm interviewing them for a role to bring them on board, either as a staff member or a key leader in the company, what are some traits that you specifically look for?
Yeah, I mean, humbleness, right? Understanding, we'll say lack of constant rejection, right? There's constant a reason why something hasn't happened. Looking for people that have faced adversity before, and ask them how they have handled adversity, right? Skill set can matter, right? But drive and ambition is a big thing, right? If they have a reason for why they want to get somewhere and they're not just looking for a paycheck every week, you'll find you can sculpt those. Where on the other point, if you have someone who may have all the experience in the world on paper, but it lack that drive and ambition, where really you'll have a harder time because you're going to face resistance, right? I always, in construction business, I always laugh because I had people come up to me and like, well, we've done it, I've been doing this for 20 years. And I'm like, okay, well, guess you've been doing it wrong for 20 years, right? And it's just like the time in doesn't
That's a
matter
hit to
in
the
this
ego.
world, right? I'm just sitting there like we would do really complicated construction projects with my dad, and I'm sitting there like, that's okay, man. I get it. I'm half your age, and that's fine. But doing it wrong and for a long time doesn't make it right. And many times, if you can be open to a point, like, listen, we can do it your way, and it's going to be wrong, and it's going to be 10 times harder, right? It's like, there's a door right here, but there's a wall, and you're trying to break through the wall because you've always broken through the wall, or you can just open the door. Like, what do you want to do, right? Oh, you've always broken through the wall? Well, we could just open the door. Oh, you've always broken through the wall. Okay, well then, all right, break through the wall. I'll just go through the door.
I'm going to make sure and credit you with that quote, because that's strong. That's doing it wrong for a long time doesn't make it right.
Yeah.
That's so powerful. So the things that I heard you say, I said, hey, what traits are you looking for? People that are humble, people that have a good understanding, that they know how to face adversity. They've faced it before. You said drive and ambition. I think it is important too. I agree with you. For us, we always look for traits like this when I'm looking to hire someone. It's more important to have the character and the drive and ambition, because you can train skills.
Correct.
Right? I think that's very, very strong statement.
Yeah.
So
willingness to learn is very important, right? And
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think that it's so funny because you get through, or I go through some of these conversations, and you get through this, and we could ask, 100 strong business leaders and entrepreneurs, and hey, what are these 3 traits, or what are these 5 traits? And you'll have, 1, 2, or 3 that'll consistently overlap. For the people that are really good in leadership, that'll consistently overlap. And then the question becomes, well, like, which is the most important? And it's like, well, some of that depends on the business, maybe where the business is at, where your team is at as a leader, and so forth. But I would say, definitely top 1, 2, or 3 is always going to be willingness to learn, because people can move from where they're at to somewhere else. One other question I have for you, kind of as we're coming down the pipe here. So who are the people now? Because if somebody's listening to this show or watching this show, and they go, man, we've talked about a broad scope of stuff. The ultra running thing has always been fascinating to me, because in my mind, I think, oh my gosh, I could never do that. And I hate to say that, but I'm just saying it how it is, Jason. Right. But you go through, and like, you've got all these awesome business experiences, the entrepreneurial, pieces of it. You have the investment piece, you do the ultra running. So people look at it and go, man, you're just a very driven, successful individual. Who are the people now that you look to that influence you? Is there specific people, or are there specific people, or are there traits you look for to take from each individual? Who influences Jason Yarusi?
I'd say my wife is top of the list, right? And she, having a great partner in your life speaks just levels that you can't understand until you have that great partner, right? She's been my partner in business, right? And many times, like, she's in the day to day, she's on house family. She doesn't come into business when she here. She's a good, we'll say, lighthouse, right? She's a good reasoning fashion. Where a simple part, one question she'll ask me is that, do we need to do that? Right. And that's a very good level for business, right? Like, well, it makes you stop when you're on a fast pace and say, well, actually, no, we don't. Right. Or this is why. Right. But you can create a rationale in your head when sometimes you're so focused on just going and driving ahead that you're jumping steps that don't need to be jumped. Right.
Sure.
That'd be one. I had working at that outdoor bar. I had an owner. He passed away now, but guy was just crazy interesting. He would just do things. It became the biggest outdoor bar in New York City. He built over the winter one time. It was only open in the summer, a big roof deck, right? In New York City.
Okay.
I got on a barge without any permits, without anything, right? But it had become such a staple in the community. By the next season when it opened, because he was out there, they couldn't make him take it down. because it had become this big thing. And he was like, well, I've always on the premise of do now and ask permission later. I was like, well, that's just such an interesting concept, because I had never heard that part. It was always permission first. And sometimes you're asking permission to the wrong person, and you're going to get a no because you're asking the wrong person. When in fact, sometimes you do, because it sets up the stage of you actually need permission or not, right? I'm not saying, break laws or break rules or do all these parts, but we create so many barriers in our mind of why we need to ask so many people, when in fact, we're not asking the right people anything that's going to help us forward.
I love it, man. And I absolutely agree with you. When, I often, when I have people ask, hey, who are influencers? And certainly I have authors that I look to and many people that have mentored me along the way. But I think you said something very, very powerful. Having that partner that's the lighthouse that can, and it can be a bruise to the ego sometimes, because like you're saying, she'll look at you and go, do we really need to do that? And if it's your own idea, you're like, yeah, of course we do. Are you kidding me? We need to do that. And she's like, So like, I can hear that. I can hear my wife saying the same thing. Right. So I think that's so powerful. The other thing that I think for people that are in business like that, Jason, and you could comment on this, having that strong partner is they're the person that is behind you, pushing you forward, reminding you, maybe they're driving for a minute, reminding you that you can.
Yeah. Correct.
So
I couldn't say it better, right? It's a person that's outside of your own head, giving you the support that sometimes they don't even know what they're supporting, but they're just giving you the support.
Well, and I think too, they know who you are as a person, and they, so often, we say it in business, we say it when I've coached you sports for years. And so often you'll look and go, oh, well, people on the outside, they can see more potential in you and they can see more in you than you can. When you get into those real, genuine, deep relationships like that, it's so true, man. It is so true. Like there are people that they see right past the barriers that you've got the barrier right here in front of you, and they're far enough, maybe to the back or to the side. Like you were talking earlier, you said, hey, if you've got this barrier, there's always a way to go, over, around. Sometimes they're the one in the back going, well, hey, what if you just built this? You can go up and over. You're like, oh,
true.
Yeah. But you're standing this close to the wall, staring at it. They got to have that perspective to have your back, so to speak. So, well, we're just, past the 45-minute mark, coming down the pipe here. A couple of things as reminders for the audience. Do definitely check out Jason's website, jasonyarusi.com, JASONYARUSI.com. And he's got links to everything there. You should tune in and listen to his podcast. Really motivational, high energy, upbeat. I enjoy listening to you. I always enjoy listening to other creators that have that fire and have that passion and motivation. It's so much fun. And then I put up here a few times, check out Jason on LinkedIn if you want to connect on that more personal level, or you could email him. I had his email on the screen there. I'm pretty sure you're the only Jason Yarusi on LinkedIn. So if they look it up, it's linkedin.com/n/
I think I've owned it. So I think I've owned that
Jason
format right there.
So any final thoughts that you might have to take us out for the Leadership Toolkit today, Jason?
Well, I just think it's been a great talk track, right? I would go back and listen to some great questions, like even that part, some of the most powerful things are questions, right? If you go back and listen to Mike's questions throughout, like that sets the stage, right? Because many times we want the answer, but if you can come up with a great question, that gets you the answer. And I've been stuck many times when I've wanted an answer and I've realized that the answer was stuck because I didn't know the right question to ask. And so of course I'm not getting the right answer, right? If I'm not asking the right question, well, shocking, I am not going to get the right answer. But when I learn how to craft the question correctly, targeted to what I'm trying to figure out, lo and behold, what happens? Well, I get an answer magically.
Well, thank you for the compliment. Very powerful insight as well. Thank you for the compliment. I really have enjoyed this conversation too. I'm sure people got a lot out of it. So if you would hang tight for just a sec, I'll go ahead and take us out for the afternoon. Okay. And friends, that is going to bring us to a close. That is another episode of the Leadership Toolkit with my new friend, Jason Yarusi. Make sure, I'm telling you, check out his website, check out his speaking, check out his podcast. The guy is he's an absolute light. Again, great conversation today, wealth of information. And if you want to get pumped up, you should tune in and listen to him. Do me one favor also, if you're watching or listening to this show, throw some thumbs up on it. share a comment, ask a question. I always try and respond to those. And most importantly, if you know somebody that would gain some insight, gain some wisdom, help maybe move somebody else forward, share this show with them. That's the best thing. It helps the show grow. It it puts you in a position of saying, hey, I learned this and I think you would really benefit from it, and can help you grow relationships, and it will help other people move along. So I appreciate you very much. I thank you for tuning in. I value your time. Come back and see us next week, next Wednesday. Until then, stay great. We'll talk soon, everybody.